that the Commission will have many responses to this consultation, not the least from Spain, so that's good. First of all, I would just like to thank you for inviting the ECB to this important conference. And I have only one version of my presentation. This version has slides. The only thing I can offer is not being entirely synchronized with the slides, if that would help. I mean, after all, I come from the ECB. But as a caveat before I start, I just want to mention that the views that I will express today are personal and do not necessarily reflect the position of the ECB. So what we have heard, and what is entirely true, is that financial markets are indeed undergoing a key transformation, and interest rate benchmarks, including interbank offered rates, IBORs, are in the process of being reformed or substituted by risk-free rates. All market participants must be aware and they must prepare for the transition. The transition to risk-free rates, or RFRs, such as SOFR for the US dollar market, SONIA for the pound sterling, and the Euro STR for the euro, is a major global undertaking, as we also have heard. Today, I will have a slightly limited focus in the sense that I will recall the background of the global reform efforts. To some extent, you have heard it already. I will also present the new euro short-term rate, the Euro STR, and the transition from EONIA to the Euro STR. So incidents of rate manipulation, but also, importantly, declining activity in the underlying interbank unsecured funding markets resulted in global regulatory efforts, including the adoption in 2013 of the IOSCO principles. And in 2014, the Financial Stability Board published recommendations to strengthen existing benchmarks by underpinning them with real transaction data and to develop alternative risk-free reference rates. In the European Union, these efforts have resulted in the adoption of the Benchmarks Regulation, the BMR, which covers the provision of benchmarks, the contributions to benchmarks, and the use of benchmarks. The BMR will be phased in fully for critical benchmarks and third country benchmarks as of 1st January 2022. As you know, the most widely used benchmarks for contracts in euro are the Euro Overnight Index Average, so EONIA, and the Euro Interbank Offered Rate, EURIBOR. EONIA was indeed, for a long time, the overnight reference rate for the euro, computed as a weighted average of all overnight unsecured lending interbank transactions of panel banks and published at 1900 CET. As one of the IBORs, EURIBOR has been around since the beginning of the euro and is a quote-based interest rate benchmark available for several maturities and calculated daily by its administrator, EMMI, on the basis of quotes of panel banks. It's published every day, or it is published every day at 11 CET. The BMR requires benchmarks to be reliable, robust, and underpinned by observable transactions. Now, EONIA and EURIBOR did not comply with these requirements, and on the one hand, EONIA will therefore discontinue at the end of 2021, whereas EURIBOR has been reformed to ensure BMR compliance. And it's important to take on board that for users, this means that EONIA will be replaced, and users must transition to the Euro STR. For EURIBOR, users will need to introduce fallbacks in compliance with the BMR. In 2017, the European Central Bank announced two measures to support the private sector in finding solutions related to the transition to risk-free rates. First, the ECB announced that it will produce its own overnight reference rate, which is today the Euro short-term rate, Euro STR. And secondly, the ECB, together with the European Commission, the European Securities and Markets Authority, and the Belgian Financial Services and Markets Authority, established a private sector working group on Euro risk-free rates with a mandate to identify a Euro risk-free rate and develop plans for its adoption and the transition to the new risk-free rates. The working group on Euro risk-free rates has several substreams. The first one, the selection of the risk-free rate, but also the development of term rates based on the Euro STR, as we have heard a lot about. There is also a subgroup on legal matters and contractual robustness, and another one was very important for the transition path for the move away from Ionia to Euro STR. For the market adoption phase, new subgroups have been established this year. We have a new subgroup on market adoption, another one on financial accounting and risk management, and finally a new subgroup on communication and education. As you know, Euro STR was launched, and it was successfully launched on the 2nd October 2019. The Euro STR reflects the wholesale Euro unsecured overnight borrowing costs of Euro area banks. Euro STR is based entirely on borrowing transactions in Euro that are reported by banks in the ECB's Money Market Statistical Reporting, MMSR. Since June 2018, the ECB has published preliminary figures that we call pre-Euro STR, which has allowed market participants to familiarize themselves with its statistical properties. The ECB embarked on the production of the Euro STR with the intention that it should have all the features needed by market participants. And the ECB therefore aims to follow best practices for benchmark production. The ECB started to publish the Euro STR on 2nd October, reflecting the trading activity of 1st October 2019. And from that date, the Euro STR will be continuously published for each Target 2 business day, based on transactions conducted and settled on the previous day, so that is reporting date T, with a maturity T+1. Euro STR will be published on every Target 2 business day at 8 o'clock CET. And the MMSR sample currently covers the 50 largest bank in the Euro area in terms of balance sheet size. I would like to also mention that the Euro STR is computed using a 25% trimming, and the trimmed mean is a measure of the central tendency of the distribution of rates. It is used to reduce the impact of significant outliers on the computation of the Euro STR. Finally, I just want to also note, because it's quite rare these days, that the Euro STR is publicly available for free. So that was the promotion. Now comes a comparison with Ionia. So Ionia and the Euro STR have one feature in common. They both rely on transactions from the euro-denominated overnight unsecured money market segment, but they do differ in several ways. Ionia is administrated by the private sector via the EMMI, while the Euro STR is administrated by the ECB. Ionia relied on voluntary data input by panel banks, while the ECB's new rate is built on the daily data submissions of banks reporting in accordance with the MMSR regulation, which is, of course, binding on reporting agents. Ionia represented a weighted average rate of the submitted contributions. The Euro STR relies on individual transactions. The Euro STR is based on unsecured overnight borrowing deposit transactions, while Ionia was calculated using unsecured overnight lending transactions. Ionia is widely used as a reference rate in financial instruments, but also as collateral remuneration rate and discounting curve for euro cash flows. So the transition from Eonia to euro SDR has an important impact in many different dimensions. For instance, with regard to IT systems, market conventions and documentation used for derivatives and cash products, and also valuation purposes. And in view of the wide importance of Eonia, an immediate deliverable of the working group on euro risk-free rates was to find the alternative risk-free rate which could replace Eonia. One major step, therefore, in the preparations of the working group was to the identification of the risk-free rate for the euro. And on 13 September 2018, the working group crossed this milestone through the selection of the euro SDR as a euro risk-free rate. And this took place following a consultation with the public regarding possible candidates. And in March 2019, the ECB confirmed the start date of the euro SDR, as said, on 2 October 2019. However, the working group also had to devise a plan for the replacement of Eonia and recommended that market transition to Ester should use for an interim period a recalibration approach, whereby the Eonia methodology no longer relies on contributions from panel banks as before, but is calculated as a fixed spread over the new euro SDR. At the end of May 2019, the ECB published the outcome of the calculation of the fixed spread at 8.5 basis points, and the EMMI published the results of a consultation regarding the recalibration of the methodology, and subsequently announced that the EMMI would modify the Eonia methodology to become euro SDR plus a fixed spread of 8.5 basis points from the first publication date of the euro SDR, which was the 2nd October, so that is reality, until the discontinuation of Eonia on 3 January 2022. On 19 August 2019, the working group published a report which provided market participants with details on how to transition from Eonia to euro SDR, and also on how to make the appropriate changes to adapt to a T+1 publication. That is, taking into account that the euro SDR is available at 8 o'clock CET. Eonia continued to be published by 1900 CET based on same-day transactions until 30 September 2019, after which its publication time moved to 9:15 CET on T+1. And the good news is that there was no market disruptions due to the launch of the euro SDR. With wire services publishing ECB information regarding the euro SDR correctly and timely, and banks managing a smooth changeover from Eonia to euro SDR. There were also no break in the time series between pre-euro SDR and euro SDR as of 1st of October. So both in terms of stability of rate and volumes, which is an indication of the high quality of data. We can also see here in the chart that the fall in rate of 10 basis points is an illustration that the transmission of monetary policy rate changes by the ECB is well reflected by the new rate. Whilst it is still early days, to be sure, market activity based on new products has started quickly, both in derivatives and in securities. And I list some of the activities on this slide. But a decisive step in the future for the migration of liquidity will be the introduction of euro SDR discounting curves by the main clearers, which is foreseen in the 2nd quarter of 2020. Now to some legal aspects, as I'm a lawyer by birth, I was going to say, but quite active in this part of the working group's activities. I want to just first mention that on 15 May 2019, the working group launched a public consultation on the legal implications for new and legacy contracts referencing Eonia. And a summary of the feedback that we received in the public consultation was published on 27 June, and on 16 July this year, the working group recommended a series of legal measures, which we refer to as the Eonia to EUR-STR Legal Action Plan. The Eonia to EUR-STR Legal Action Plan addresses two critical events. One, the modification of the methodology for Eonia on the 2nd October 2019. And two, the cessation of publication of Eonia at the end of 2021 with regard to new and legacy contracts in all asset classes. So in both cases, new and legacy contracts for derivatives, collateral agreements, and cash products. At the outset of the Eonia to EUR-STR Legal Action Plan, the working group recommended EUR-STR plus a fixed spread of 8.5 basis points as the Eonia fallback rate for all products. It also made very clear that market participants should consider avoiding entering into any new contracts referencing Eonia, in particular new contracts maturing after 31 December 2021. For existing contracts referencing Eonia and maturing after December 2021, market participants should consider replacing Eonia as a primary rate as soon as possible or embed robust fallback clauses. So this is maybe more for the lawyers in the audience, or maybe you can pass on the message to your legal colleagues. So for a comprehensive review of the legal recommendations to ensure a good transition from Eonia to EUR-STR, there are 3 documents to consult, all published in the spring and summer of 2019. One, the public consultation report itself, which of course included many proposals from the legal subgroup of the working group, but later on the summary of responses on the basis of that report, and finally the final recommendations on the Eonia to EUR-STR Legal Action Plan. So whilst the final recommendations are set out in a relatively short document, for those of you who would like to have the full picture, it's useful to consult all 3 documents. Regarding the change in Eonia's publication time, the working group encouraged market participants to screen their inventory of affected transactions and system in order to make the necessary modifications, to design a communication strategy towards clients to ensure awareness, and also consider adjusting the default settlement time. Regarding the transition period until Eonia is discontinued, scheduled for 3 January 2022, the working group recommends that market participants actively transition FROs, so floating rate options, referencing Eonia, to EUR-STR FROs before the end of 2021. CCPs are recommended to set the decounting switch date as early as possible and preferable towards the end of the second quarter of 2020. Market participants should introduce all necessary modifications to be able to issue, buy, trade, and manage new securities indexed to EUR-STR. So to support an orderly transition, market participants should understand their exposures and risk. They should quantify these exposures and their risks, and they should put in place contingency arrangements. Market participants should actively reduce reliance on Eonia and IBOR under reform, and they should plan for this transition now, and they should use the EUR-STR where possible, and they should define scenarios and roadmaps for the transition. Market participants should engage with the transition efforts. They should consider the measures recommended by the working group on euro risk-free rates. They should tap into other market-led transition initiatives, perhaps domestic ones in specific jurisdictions. And they should raise awareness internally and externally and set up a transition program and an internal governance structure. In this way, market participants can be well prepared. I think for some reason the slides doesn't go any further, so I plan to end here then. So I think it was very structured and I followed the slides maybe too much, but in the end I finish here, which you don't know whether it was planned or not. Thank you very much for the attention.